Hello everybody, I'm Kate Cass, and welcome to our edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about Doctor Who. One of the biggest staples of Doctor Who is change. You can't be a program that's been going on and off for roughly 60 years without being able to shake things up once in a while. The biggest change that happens in Doctor Who exclusively is Regeneration, where the main character remains the same but is replaced with a new actor and undergoes certain personality changes. The tail end of Doctor Who's 50th anniversary was when I first experienced that change in real time, when Matt Smith departed from the role to regenerate into Peter Capaldi and begin the cycle anew. However, there was something very special and very important about this particular change, the significance of which actually helped correct my biggest issue with the last time the Doctor had regenerated.
I don't want to go.
The End of Time and I have a complicated relationship. I mean, I don't want to ruin anyone's nostalgia for this episode. I come from the Moffat era. I know how disheartening it is for someone to dump on your era of the show that probably really moved you. But as a story, The End of Time, it ain't great. It's really long and overbloated, there's tons of superfluous characters, it's convoluted as all heck with both its tone and narrative, even by this show's standards, and that's really saying something, and the whole thing with the Master Race, I'm sorry, even for the Master that was dumb. Now that's not to say it doesn't have anything to offer. Literally every scene with Wilf is perfection. The story would be almost unbearable for me without him. Timothy Dalton as Rassilon is one of the best casting choices in the history of the show, and there are some really strong moments with the Doctor. Almost everything that involves him attempting to have a heart-to-heart with Wilf or the Master is pretty amazing stuff and performed superbly. However, paradoxically, some of those moments contribute to my biggest problem with The End of Time. The 10th Doctor has an unusual attitude towards regenerating, where before it was always treated as a sort of defense mechanism to save a Time Lord's life, the way 10 describes it makes it sound like the Doctor, as the audience knows and loves him, is really dying when that happens.
Even if I change, it feels like dying. Some new man goes sauntering away. And I'm dead.
This always left a sour taste in my mouth. Maybe it's because I joined the fandom right after Tennant's run and kept getting frustrated when people just couldn't let go of the fact that Ten was gone, but I don't think the way this episode deals with that era ending really helped matters. I understand this might have been a way to add more weight to the prophecy of the Doctor's death that was foreshadowed in previous episodes, and I'm not saying you can't depict regeneration as something difficult or on some level traumatic to go through, but the way Ten reacted to the mere idea of his time ending always rubbed me the wrong way. Only made worse when the Doctor realizes that the prophecy is about to be fulfilled, but he has to decide if he'll sacrifice himself to save Wilf's life.
I could do so much more! So much more! But this is what I get.
Tennant's acting his heart out here, but it almost feels like the Doctor is throwing a tantrum.
But it's not fair!
All of this anger and frustration put towards having to regenerate, an attitude that has never really been associated with the process before, at least not until after it happens. Now I want to be clear, my feelings on that attitude being harmful on a metatextual level are unchanged, but something I really love about Doctor Who is that future events and developments can shine past events in a new light, which is where we come to when the 11th Doctor was about to meet his end.
But times change. And so must I.
The time of the Doctor really shouldn't carry as much weight as it does, because this was like the third time there'd been a foreboding plotline about the Doctor's potential death in this era alone. However, the stakes this time get much higher when it's revealed that, despite being the 11th incarnation of the Time Lord, the Doctor has run out of regenerations. See, it was established back in the classic series that the average Time Lord had a regeneration cycle that lasted 12 regenerations, resulting in 13 bodies. Time of the Doctor points out that although this is the 11th Doctor, the regeneration into the War Doctor and that incident that created the Metacrisis Doctor still count as regenerations, and thus, he is now at the end of his life.
12 regenerations, Clara. I can't ever do it again. This is where I end up.
I remember a lot of fans were annoyed by this at the time, that it messed up the numbering, that it was Stephen Moffat wanting to address this big piece of the series lore on his own and tweaking things just so he could be the writer to do that. Pick whatever you want, there was no shortage of complaints. But if you ask me, this is one of the show's best examples of working the best with the hand they're dealt. First off, this just seemed to me like Moffat coming to what he thought was an obvious conclusion based on the show's lore. He didn't have anything to do with the Metacrisis, and the War Doctor's creation was due to behind-the-scenes taking stuff out of his control, but they are still factors he had to work with in canon. Second, if this realization was going to come at any time, this was probably the best time to do it. Not only was this a special that capped the show's 50th anniversary, a year spent looking back on Doctor Who's entire legacy, but the plot of this episode centers around the Doctor staying in a small town on a distant planet to guard the gateway the Time Lords are trying to use to return Gallifrey to this universe. The potential end of the regeneration cycle was something that I don't think the writers anticipated they'd ever have to address at some point, mainly because most of the time the show was one more budget cut away from getting tossed in the BBC's dustbin, and this was introduced in the 4th Doctor's era. But now that we've reached the point where it's a very real possibility that the Doctor cannot regenerate anymore, coming to that conclusion at a time where the Time Lords are closer than they have been throughout the entire revived series feels like the best time to tackle what that means and potentially how to extend it. Before then though, the Doctor stays in that spot for hundreds and hundreds of years. After over 1,000 years of constant travel and never looking back, if there was one way the Doctor was going to stay somewhere, it'd be to preserve his people's safety, be a hero to innocent beings, and face oncoming alien threats in the most clever ways he can. As his successor would say,
"Where I stand, it's where I fall."
When the Doctor discloses to Clara about 300 years into this mission that he is at the end of his regeneration cycle, suddenly his choice to stay here and do what he's been doing has so much more weight to it. The more I reflected on it, the more I realized how much more context it adds to the actions of the 11th Doctor. It suddenly makes sense why he wasn't just dodging deadly situations like usual, but sometimes actively running away from them, because this time, there's no burst of energy and a new face waiting for him on the other side. This is his last face, his last run through the universe. It's no wonder that by the end of his tenure, the 11th Doctor lived longer than all of his predecessors combined. Going back to the topic that kicked off the discussion, when I thought back to it, it also made me understand what the Doctor was really feeling and going through in the end of time so much better. This wasn't just a case of changing parts of who he was again, this was a case of him changing for the last time. I know regeneration isn't a guarantee for the Doctor every time he faces a life-threatening situation. Like, there are conditions where he can actually die even if he still has regenerations left, and maybe that's what End of Time was originally trying to convey, but knowing what we know from Time of the Doctor, this is probably the first time the Doctor has really had to confront the idea that his days are really, truly numbered. Doesn't explain that little stunt he pulled in Journey's End, but oh well. Actually, geez, could you imagine how pissed he must have been that he burned through a regeneration to keep his look, only to be told a few months later that he's gonna have to die and change so soon after anyway? This is what vanity does to you, people.
But as soon as that was done, I didn't need to change. I didn't want to, why would I? Look at me.
Did you ever think that maybe there's more to life than being really, really, really ridiculously good looking?
I think the realizations in Time of the Doctor make this crisis the 10th Doctor goes through during his final days much more powerful than they were originally. This was no longer a petty refusal to accept the end of an era and begin another. This was the Doctor desperately clinging to an incarnation who has survived and escaped so much out of fear that this would be the last time he would be able to regenerate. It even explains why the Doctor holds back said regeneration long enough to have a little farewell tour. Yes, as an epilogue to the Russell T Davies era, it works and it's great, but it can feel a little out of place to have the Doctor pop in and nod at some of his companions while he's dying. But now, it reads more as the Doctor giving himself a memorial, because that was the last time he'd die and get a warning. So if he wants to take some time to look back on this family he's built over time and space, you know what? Go for it. In fact, when the 11th Doctor appears in the Sarah Jane Adventures, in an episode also penned by Russell T Davies, it's revealed that the Doctor didn't just look back on the companions he ran into during his previous incarnation, but his entire life. Seeing the impact he's had on all these friends he's made over hundreds of years. It's really beautiful and emotional to realize that with the last moments of what he thought was his last regeneration, he took some time to look back on the people he shared that journey with.
But the last time I was dying, I looked back on all of you, every single one, and I was so proud.
Now, was any of this intentional? At best, Not likely. However, that's not really how Doctor Who works anyway. Part of what makes Doctor Who such a unique show is that it's basically a baton pass narrative. The current team are passed a legacy and storyline that's been handed over time and time and time again, and are told to continue the race forward as best they can while keeping all the previous legs in mind. If, say, it doesn't add up to one writer that the Doctor would destroy his own people, no matter the context of the situation we've been told, they could find a way to convey those concerns to the characters and maybe even rewrite the events. If you're often asking the question of why the Doctor can't change historical events, especially tragic ones, beyond the hand-wave response of, because I'm a Time Lord and I said so, you can give an in-universe explanation that could alter things horrifically if those events are interfered with. If you're intrigued by the power and connection the Doctor seems to have and what part they played in Time Lord history, you can take a chance and dive into that while navigating what little of that history we have been told. And if, say, an incarnation of the Doctor gets very upset about his time ending to an almost out of character degree, you could potentially reverse engineer a reason as to why that might have been. A reason that maybe makes the 11th Doctor the version who prolongs and cherishes his life more than any incarnation before him. Where suddenly, I don't want to go is less stubbornly refusing to say goodbye and change, and more about having difficulties coming to terms with the fact that, as far as the Doctor knows, this is the last time he's going to be able to save his life this way. In a way, he is in fact dying as he's being reborn. This development shines a whole new light on everything from the end of time until Time of the Doctor. Was this the plan all along? Probably not. Is this me making too much out of what was on a writing level? Probably just an attempt to mend some of the show's continuity at a time where they could clear that little roadblock? Most likely. But again, because of the way Doctor Who is run as one continuing story that spans over decades and changes hands constantly, to get the most enjoyment out of it, most elements are as canon as you want them to be. There are some hard rules and beloved pieces of the world that can't or shouldn't be changed, but by incorporating those changes and developments with each new iteration of the show, it can give meaning to previous events and thus make the show stronger in the long run. Even when the Doctor does get a whole new regeneration cycle at the end of Time of the Doctor, it doesn't feel like a quick cop-out to erase old continuity that fans wouldn't shut up about, but instead like an extension that the Doctor earned through his own selfish, virtuous actions. And before I get comments about this, no, I don't think the impact of this is lessened by the recent events regarding the Timeless Child. While that backstory does change how we view the Doctor's connection to regeneration, you cannot convince me that the Doctor would have made it down from that bell tower alive without that jumpstart from the people he safeguarded for half his lifetime. Anyway, all that said, I still don't love the end of time. Recontextualizing the Doctor's attitude isn't going to make the Master's sudden Jedi lightning powers any less silly, or have the supporting cast leave any impact whatsoever, or what impact they do leave not be very, very, very confusing. But all these developments further in the show that I've talked about does take perhaps the most significant story and character beat in the entire story, of the 10th Doctor reaching the end of his own time, and turns it from something that, in my eyes, came off as a petty and selfish point of view, into a seemingly immortal man struggling to come to terms with the fact that no matter how much good he does or how long he's lived for, time catches up to everyone. And that whatever he does today will decide how much closer the 11th hour comes. I still don't think it was a good transition from one generation of the show to the next. The way it's portrayed makes it far more difficult for the audience to say goodbye to this version of the show and embrace something new but familiar. You know, the philosophy that's kept Doctor Who going all this time. But for what I felt was a really rocky point in the Doctor's character arc, Time of the Doctor helped me see it in a whole new light. But now that David Tennant gets a second shot at playing our favorite renegade Time Lord in a brand new, older, and wiser incarnation, I truly hope that when his time comes to pass the torch on to Ncuti Gatwa, that maybe he'll get to say, I'm ready to go. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you think of this topic in the comments below. That's why this series is called Let's Talk About. And let me know what you think of these kind of smaller discussion videos. I'm always kind of adverse to doing them because even though I like talking about certain topics, having it not be a review makes it feel like I'm ignoring all the other aspects of whatever I'm talking about and focusing on one single thing. But it could be a good thing to put in between reviews, and I have ideas for other topics to cover, so if you guys like it, let me know and maybe we can do some more. But whatever videos come next, they'll be thanks to my very special patrons who help support my content, including Chelsea Crandall, Dave L. Sproul, Hawk Hero, Jinx Productions, and wait the wings. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to check out any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.